But also sometimes people get surprised when I tell them I'm from Canada. Usually if they're not born here, they ask me where I'm from, and I say Canada, and they say, well, you don't look Canadian. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? How's a Canadian supposed to look? Did they walk around with like a maple leaf on their head? Do I say A not in the right places? And yet I am Canadian. Can't be anything else. So sometimes people say to me, okay, well, where's your ancestors from? And sometimes I play with them a bit, and I'm like, my ancestors, well, my family's been here for 4 generations. I'm the 4th generation. And they're like, but where are your ancestors from? And I'm like, okay, part of my ancestors are from Europe. And that never satisfies people, or very rarely does. And then so I say, and the other part of my ancestry is from Africa. And they say, oh, so you're African. And I'm like, no, I'm not African. I've never been to Africa, and I actually don't know anything about Africa. And if somebody came up to me from Africa and started relating to me as they would to a normal African, I would probably make a lot of social faux pas, because I don't know anything about African culture. And same thing if somebody came to me from Europe and started relating to me in their usual ways that are traditional in whatever European country they're in. Part of my family is from Germany. If they related to me in the typical German ways and spoke German, I would have no clue what they were saying, because I'm born here in Canada, so that's basically all I know. And yet there are these kind of labels that people like to attach to things, these kind of shorthands that we all tend to need, right? It's kind of, we don't have time actually to go and research every bit of the history of the kind of whatever thing we encounter, right? We don't have time to go to say we go to a temple. We don't have time to research the history of that whole temple, go and meet all the individual monks, ask them where they're from, ask them what their daily schedule is like, what their practice is like, whether they read the suttas or the commentaries or the Abhidhamma or whatever it is. So usually we just ask them, what tradition is this temple in? And if they say Theravada, then we have an idea what that's like. If we say Mahayana, we have an idea what that's like. If they say Tibetan, we have an idea of what that's like. And it's similar when people meet other people. Actually, I was kind of told that some places they'll introduce they have this whole system of introducing their family lineage. And there's 7 parts to their family lineage or something like that. I had a friend from India, and he said the traditional way people would introduce they have this long introduction. It's very long. I don't know if that's true all the way everywhere in India. He's from South India. But the point of it is that there's these kind of convenient shorthands. It's convenient for people, if they find out that you are from Canada. If you say you're from Canada, they think of Canadians as being like this, right? Kind of Canadian people are like this. Yeah? And if Canadian people are like this, they relate to them in ways that are like that. Yeah? If a temple is Theravada, it's like this. And we come to the temple and expect to see things in a Theravada temple like that. Now, all of these things are reasonable, actually. These are kind of perceptions, what the Buddha calls sanya. Yeah? In other words, it's a kind of label that we attach to things. And this label has hidden meanings behind it. Yeah? Has hidden implications behind it, and has hidden perceptions attached to that. Yeah? We may have researched Theravada Buddhism, and we like Theravada. So we go to a Theravada temple, and there's automatically this feeling of like, even though we don't actually know much about the temple. We may have heard that Canadian people are nice and friendly people from other countries. Actually, I heard, so then when people, if they like Canadian people, when they meet them, maybe people like maple syrup, and they meet a Canadian person, and automatically, maybe then they're happy. Of course, the Canadian you just met may totally dislike maple syrup. Or people think Canadians are really nice. The Canadian that a person just met may be a real not kind person. There's also mean Canadians. There's also Canadians who don't like cold. And yet all these perceptions are important things for us because we don't have time to research and go through the whole history of every temple, every country, and there is a truth to it, right? There is a truth that Canada has a particular culture. Kind of culture is like that. And if you grew up here being exposed to that culture, relating to people in this culture, likely you're going to have been influenced by it. Yeah? If there's a temple that follows the Theravada lineage, then there's going to be certain things within that lineage, if they're from Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, that they're likely going to do. Actually, just coming to, I originally ordained in a Thai tradition, and just coming to many Sri Lankan temples, actually many of the chants are the same. Even though these are geographically separated areas, who knows when these various traditions arose. And I myself had never come to stay, because I was at a Thai temple, had never come to stay for a long time at a Sri Lankan one, but came to a Sri Lankan temple and felt right at home. Kind of, all the chants were the same, everything. So there is this kind of important aspect to this sanya, but there's also this kind of aspect to what they call sanyas or perceptions that can be deluding, that can cause suffering for us. Yeah? One of the aspects of these kind of sanyas that can be deluding or cause suffering is that when we have a perception like this, and we go to see something, and it doesn't fit with our perception, sometimes people can get really upset about that. Yeah? Wait a minute, I came to a Theravada temple, I expect things to be this way. You know? Things aren't that way. I get upset. Wait a minute, don't you say you're a Theravada temple? How come you don't chant Itipi So in the way I expected? You know? How come you don't chant this chant that they chanted at my temple? That's a Theravada temple, this one is. They should chant the same way. Yeah? Sometimes we meet a person from Canada, and we think, okay, wait a minute, you say you're a Canadian, then how come you're so conservative? You know? Or you say you're a Canadian, how come you're for getting nuclear weapons? Canadians aren't supposed to like nuclear weapons? Yet you're a Canadian. How come you like them? You know, how come you think the country should have them? Why do you think the country should expand its military budget? Canadians aren't militant. And so from these kind of perceptions, a lot of kind of anger can arise when our perceptions aren't appropriately filled. Yeah? When these short taglines don't fit in. Yeah? One of the reasons for this is because the way that people define their external world is part and parcel of the way that people define themselves. Yeah? In other words, a Theravada temple is like this, a Canadian is like this, my car is like this, my family is like this, my life is like this, I'm this type of person in relation to all these other things. And when I'm this type of person in relation to all these other things, being the person that I am, when I relate to this thing, it should behave this way. Yeah? In other words, people can think of themselves in many different ways. I'm this kind of person who can accomplish things. Yeah? When a person becomes this kind of person who accomplishes things, they have perceptions about the outside world, what the things are that they should be able to accomplish. Yeah? I remember that I had a friend, just as a kind of facetious example, when I was really young, in high school, and he was very kind of a handsome man, kind of very physically attractive man. And he just used to stand around, and a lot of women would pay attention to him. Kind of just standing there. And, that became part of his personality at that time. Became part of his perception, self-perception, based on the way this external world related to him. He's a person who dresses this way, whose face is like this. The external world should behave to him in this way. And then as time goes on, people get older, they get wrinkles or whatever, and not as many women start paying attention to that particular man. So I remember there was a time when this friend of mine said to me, he's like, "The man you once knew is no more." I was like, "Oh, whatever, kind of." That's when we were in our 20s, and it's because no longer 17 or 18. Start getting into your mid-20s, and wrinkles start to appear, and 19-year-old women no longer stare at you the same way. And that perception, this self-perception, I'm this man who is very stylish, who women like, when that perception changes, there's a lot of suffering. This external component of the world, people should behave to me in this way, is related to a person's internal perception of themselves. Similarly, you can see all kinds of examples of this, People define themselves as being this or that type of person. I'm a person who's this way. I'm a person who's that way. And the second way that this type of defining can cause suffering is that when a person defines who they are, they limit themselves. In other words, if I'm a person who's this way, it means I can't be another way. If I'm a person who's angry, it means I can't be a person who's calm. It's that way. I'm that type of person. Angry people are like this. The world external to me should behave this way when I get angry. Any of these things change, people suffer. But the thing about it is that when we limit ourselves this way, we also limit the ways in which we can respond to the world. So in other words, we define the way the world outside should be. We define ourselves, who we are. Then we can't change. We don't want to change. One of the reasons for this is because when a person has a self-perception, they have an idea about who their personality is, what type of person they are, how they relate to the world, how the world relates to them. This is actually the same, the same kind of safe feeling that comes when their external world is clearly defined. Canada should be this way. My work should be this way. My family is this way. My life is this way. And when things are all very clearly spelled out in this way, it seems real safe. The world is a safe place to be. We know how it is. We know how it should be. We know how it will be when we interact with it. And then when we define ourselves as being this or that type of person, we start to feel like we have a safety within ourselves. I'm a person who's like this. I'm a person who is physically attractive. Women like me. I'm a person who's very smart, very intelligent. I'm an intelligent person. I'm a person who's very practical. I can get the job done. I'm a person who's very persevering. I put forth effort. I can keep going when other people would stop. When we have these particular qualities, these particular perceptions about ourselves, then it starts to seem like a safe thing, something that we can grab onto. I actually had one friend in university, not that all these, giving all these stories about my friends, but actually I've got a lot about myself too, but But this particular friend, he went away on a trip to South America. And it was when we were in university, and he got selected to be, I think, part of this leadership conference. And he went down to South America for this conference. And he traveled there, and what he said when he came back was, he's like, something you learn when you travel is that your external world can change a lot. This, I'm paraphrasing him. But what you always carry with you is that essence. Who you really are. You take that with you wherever you go. And so what that means is there's something safe, something we can grab onto that's with us wherever we go. If there's something safe we can grab onto that's with us wherever we go, that's a good thing. We've got a place of safety amidst changing conditions. The trouble with all of this is that not only does our external world change, not only do the perceptions we have this is what Canadians are like. Canadians are always changing. Yeah? Canadians are very liberal. We had a conservative prime minister for almost a decade. And Canada became a very big kind of oil economy for a while. Yeah? We have perceptions about temples. You know? Theravada temples are this way. You know? But then, maybe there's a Theravada temple that starts to talk about Mahayana teachings. Yeah? We have perceptions about ourselves. I'm this type of person. I'm an intelligent person. But then, the day comes, we find that the ease with which we used to think about things, the ease with which we used to solve problems changes. It's not the same anymore. Yeah? I'm a very beautiful person. Then the day comes that the face changes on a person. So this is what the Buddha teaches about, that actually this is what the Buddha calls anatta, or not self. Yeah? In other words, the things outside of us, those are not ourself. They're constantly changing. The things inside of us, our perceptions about what we are, our perceptions of our capabilities, our feelings, our consciousness, whatever it is that's watching, all these things are changing. They're all dependent on other conditions. Because they're dependent on other conditions, when those conditions change, these things change too. And when they change, if we're grabbing onto them, guess what happens? We lose our place of safety. We lose that refuge that we thought we had. And we suffer because of that. Yeah. But the nice thing about it is that this is an option. These things are actually perceptions. They're things that we create. Yeah? Because they're things that we create, we can change them. And because they're things that we can change, if we change them in a direction that's more appropriate for seeing things in a way that doesn't cause us to suffer, then our practice benefits from that. Then we don't have to suffer from them in the same way. Yeah? In other words, we have an option not to suffer from these perceptions in the way that people normally would, by grabbing onto them, by building them. And the way that we exercise this option, the way that we learn not to suffer from these things, is to cultivate this perception of not self. Yeah? In other words, in relation to things external to us, the things that we love, the things that we care about, we usually have this perception, this is the way it's going to be. But we learn to counter that perception and constantly bring up this perception, this thing will change. This is not who I am. Now that can seem like something really unpleasant, right? Something we really love. We're thinking about this thing is going to change. But the nice thing about it is that what that actually does is it detaches our mind from that thing. Yeah? Detaching our mind from this external thing, we also detach ourselves kind of internally a bit. And when we're not defining this thing external to us, we're not defining ourselves, what we then have is a whole range of other options. Yeah? If all I'm doing is relating to this person, this is the person who's my spouse, my son, my daughter, my boss, whatever it is, they're this way, I'm this way, this is my perception of them, how they're going to be, how I'm going to react to them. We've just limited our range of options for skillful behavior with that person, with that situation. But when we change our perception, look, this thing is going to change, I'm going to change, it opens up a whole new range of possibilities. Yeah? If we're a person who's constantly getting thrown off by our anger in relation to another person, we define ourselves as an angry person. Once we learn to change that perception, look, this angry person is not who I am. This arises because of causes and conditions. This is something I can change. Now we actually have an option to change that. If we have this thought, I'm this kind of outgoing person, I can never be alone by myself. Right there we have a definition that limits us. We can't go alone to practice meditation. If we have these ideas about ourselves, I'm this really person who doesn't like to interact with other people. right there we've limited ourselves. Excuse me. That means that we can never become a person who goes and interacts with other people. But when we learn to change our perception about all these things, when we learn to apply the perception of not self, these things are not who I am, we gain a range of options. Although usually this is the way I react. Usually I'm an angry person. Usually I'm a shy person. Usually I'm an extroverted person. When the situation changes, when our external perception of the situation changes, look, this situation calls for me to be opposite to what I usually am. We now have the option to cultivate that. We're now no longer defined in a box, defined and limited to what we thought we were. So this is why when people come to meditate and start to practice it often, what they tend to find is that these kind of personality tests that they do on people, like this person is I can't remember, they have all these various categories. My uncle was going to apply for a job interview and they were going to give him a personality test, and we were trying to look up what the personality test would be, because then you can find out what the categories are. But then the thing about it is when people come to meditate, what they notice is that they actually stop being able to define them in these boxes as much. One of the reasons for this is that when we start to meditate, we learn to apply these various techniques to undercut the things that are causing us to suffer, regardless of who we think we are, regardless of what we think our capabilities are. The question stops being, who am I, and starts being, what's skillful? What's the right thing to do right now? And this is one of the reasons why you hear about these really skillful masters. One time they'll be with one student, they can seem totally happy and really relaxed. Another person, another student they're with, they can seem like this really terrible taskmaster. And they have this incredible ability to switch in like a second. So you don't really know if they're actually angry or actually happy. So they said Cha, when he was with the kind of foreign monks, he'd be really grandfatherly and friendly. And when he was with the Thai monks, he'd be very, very strict. And the foreign monks would say, it's too bad that Ajahn Chah can't really be who he is with the Thai monks. He can be really who he is with us, And the Thai monks would say stuff like, it's too bad that Ajahn Chah has to put on this kind of fake face to the foreigners, He can't really be who he is with them, He can really be who he is with us. But then the whole point of the story is that there's no Ajahn Chah, So Ajahn Chah is this kind of perception. And so long as we remove the thought that we are this person, these things outside of us are this way, we gain a range of options, a range of skillful behavior. And with that range, we can undercut a lot of the things that's been with us for a long time, causing us to suffer. They're protected by these perceptions. Some of the most enduring bad habits, most enduring difficulties, get protected by these perceptions of ourselves. And when we change our perception, we gain the option to stop them. So this is a liberating aspect of the Buddha's teaching of not self. Not just that the things outside are bad or watch it or whatever, but it gives us the option to stop some of the unskillful behavior that comes when we define things, when we make things black and white, when we have these perceptions that the things outside of us don't change, that we don't change, that they're this way. When we change that perception, we gain the ability to get a range of skillful behavior that allows us to stop some of these things that's been causing us to suffer for a long time. So those are some of the liberating aspects of the Buddha's teachings on not self. Okay, so I think I'll leave that for reflection today. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
I do have a question. So you mentioned the word not.
Yeah.
I always, the general knowledge concept of that is non-self. But from a historical perspective, it also means no soul. So I'm just curious, what is the true meaning of that word? Because if you go back to, it comes from the word "ātma," which is a Sanskrit word. shorthand means life. So is its definition no life, soul, or no self, like it's called oneself?
So basically, it's one of these things with language, like a word can cover a whole range of possibilities. So one of the things is that in the samana schools at the Buddha's time, seeking to end rebirth, they thought that you would end rebirth when you saw your true self, or merged yourself with your true self, or merged yourself with the Brahman, which is the true self, or had a true self that was independent of the Brahman. And basically all their ideas around ending rebirth related to this idea of what the self was, you know, and how to basically get in touch with the self. So the Buddha's teachings on anatta, they're basically a strategy. Because once a person defines that they have this particular true self, then whatever they perceive as that self, if they have a meditative experience, if something happens to them, if they just have a normal perception of something, whatever they think of as their self, they grab onto that. And if they grab onto that, they can't go beyond it. Yeah? In other words, this perception of self becomes something that they cling to, which causes them to suffer and completely blocks their potential to attain nibbana. So this is why one of the first fetters to go is this kind of perception of self, sakkaya ditthi. Yeah. So this word anatta, it covers a range of things. It covers, yes, that whatever perception we have of a self is false. Yeah. That's not our true self. Yeah. But it also covers a range of other possibilities. The things external to us are also not our true self. But its implication is not just a metaphysical concept, like it's not just something that's like a teaching to be in a book. It's actually a meditation teaching that's meant to be applied. Yeah. In other words, there's things that we cling very strongly to because we think they're ourself. These are even things, sometimes these are things that are unpleasant, actually. People cling to these very unpleasant aspects of their character, thinking it's them at the gross level, and then they can't change them. People cling to really pleasant aspects of their character, and sometimes when you cling to something that's really pleasant, you become very conceited and complacent, and then that good quality falls away. Then there's actually, very peaceful states that people attain through meditation. If a person clings to that as their true self, then they stop wanting to go any further. Yeah? So in other words, this perception of not self gets applied right from the gross levels up to meditative attainments, even to the very most refined levels. At the end, it even gets applied to the Buddha's teaching itself, because that's the last thing that people tend to cling to before they let go of everything. And then that's something that's indescribable. So it's a strategy, basically. Not self as a strategy to lead people onwards in the Buddha's teaching, rather than just a metaphysical concept, although it also has metaphysical implications.